Good morning, everyone. On behalf of IAP Coimbatore, I would like to welcome all the speakers and all the viewers on this Sunday morning. Today's CME is on thalassemia to commemorate World Thalassemia, which falls on May 8. And we have a list of interesting practical topics on thalassemia. Before we start the session, I would like to invite Dr. Ismail sir, President, Tamil Nadu State Chapter, to say a few words.
Thank you, Dr. Fauzia. Good morning, all of you. I think indeed it's happy to note that World Thalassemia Day is being celebrated by IAP Coimbatore, and it's really a practical problem which we need to address in the society. I happened to travel sometime back to a tribal village near Kotagiri, a place called Mamaram, where I think we could see a lot of children down with this thalassemia and the mothers with the thalassemia trait, especially the hemoglobin rallying around 4 to 5, and really the suffering was so high. The forest department and somewhere health organizations are doing a wonderful job there at the tribal hamlet. I think the requirement of the blood transfusion, identification of the trait, and actually identification of the disease, antenatal counseling, all that matters much in this area. And pediatricians should really be focused and prevent the birth of a thalassemic child. And of course, the thalassemic affected children should be taken care of well. With this few messages, I would be happy to be a part of this program. And I congratulate Coimbatore IAP for taking up this project in a good way. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Jalil Ahmed, sir, EB member, Central EB member, IAP, to say a few words.
Thank you, Fauzia. This is on the day of thalassemia. We will congratulate the IAP Tamil Nadu State Branch and the Coimbatore District Branch to celebrate this Thalassemic Day. I also congratulate the speakers, the renowned speakers, Madam Revati Madam, for her. Especially, we all like to listen to your lecture on this special day, Madam. I wish the branch all the success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. At this juncture, I would like to say that our president of Coimbatore IAP chapter, she's not able to attend now because she's in a collector meeting, urgent collector meeting regarding COVID. So she'll be joining somewhere later. So we will quickly move on to the session. The sessions will be chaired by Dr. Venkata Desigalu, sir. Each session will be of 12 minutes. And we have decided we will answer the question at the end of the session before the quiz. So kindly pay attention to all the session. You will be able to answer the quiz well. And I hand over the session to Dr. Venkata Desigalu, sir. Sir.
Hello. Hello, dear friends. Good morning to everyone. On this eve of World Thalassemia Day, we invite you all for this live webinar CME program conducted by Indian Academy of Pediatrics, Tamil Nadu Coimbatore branch, on journey towards close to cure in thalassemia. As all of us know, there are a lot of challenges and obstacles in the overall management of thalassemics and their families. Periodical CMEs like this one will definitely help others in this field to join in our endeavor. We have 6 speakers on this topic who will enlighten us on the topic under the heading Diagnosis Thalassemia, Transfusion Therapy, Optimal Chelation, Management of Complications, Prenatal Diagnosis, and Blood and Bone Marrow Transplant, with the quiz program at the end. So to begin with, for the lecture event, I will first call upon the first speaker, none other than renowned pediatric hematologist and head BMT unit Apollo Hospital and the president of Thalassemia Welfare Association VSC Chennai, who is known to everyone and also considered as a life savior by most of the thalassemics and their parents. She is also a torch bearer in and around India in the field of care and cure in thalassemics and also for children with pediatric cancers. She also shown me the way towards Thalassemia Welfare Association to serve the thalassemic after my retirement from ICH in the hematology department. Now I call upon Dr. Revati Raj, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So good morning and thank you for this opportunity, IAP Coimbatore and Fauzia and all of your team. Actually, for the last 10 years, I have been traveling to Coimbatore every 3 months for patients with thalassemia, and because of COVID, this whole thalassemia camp has ground to a halt for the last 1 year, and it's all on Zoom and on WhatsApp video call these days, which is something I'm really missing, because the children and their families have almost become part of our extended families. And what you have witnessed, that there are pockets of tribal areas that are really struggling because they don't know what's happening to them and why they are suffering, what is the nature of the disease. Awareness is something that we definitely need to work on. And at this point, I would say that I'm extremely grateful to Mr. Ganeshan in VHS Thalassemia Center in Chennai, and Meera Menon in the Coimbatore Thamarabarani Society, and specifically Dr. Krishnasamy and his team in Masonic, who have all been amazing support to run these two organizations and to make sure that these patients are well looked after, especially during COVID times, has been a great challenge. It's not something that we imagined would happen in our lifetime, but here we are. So at least for awareness, for making things better, what we can do for the future. Thank you for this opportunity, so that we can do better, at least in times to come. So my topic is how to diagnose a patient with thalassemia. So I'm just going to cover a little bit of basics. So the truth of the matter is, when a baby is being diagnosed with thalassemia major, most families say it's because you haven't prayed, you've done something wrong, or you haven't eaten correctly during pregnancy. So there is a lot of guilt in the parents, because people are making them feel bad that it's some mistake on their part. And this was the story I learned from this family who worked in the TVS home. Mother's the cook and dad is the driver. They fell in love, got married, and because you had a love marriage, you have a baby with a blood problem. So there is so much of stigma associated with thalassemia. And this particular story, the mother had requested me to put in any talks that I'm doing to raise awareness. So she was a PhD student in IIT Madras, so very well educated girl from Pune, and her first child at the age of 22, he was diagnosed when she delivered him, was diagnosed to have thalassemia major. And she felt extremely bad, because with all her education, she could have done the screening, she could have done the testing, but because of lack of awareness, she was treated as iron deficiency, and the baby turned out to have thalassemia major. So this is something that she always requests to say. It's not education, it's lack of awareness, and we as a medical community should do as much as possible to raise awareness. Just to go back to basic physiology, we make blood in the marrow from stem cells. We're making red, white, and platelets every day. Red cells live for 120 days, platelets live for 10 days. These both don't have nuclei. That's why we're able to transfuse red cells and platelets without HLA typing, without tissue cross-match compatibility testing. All other cells of our body have nuclei and white blood cells. And to make these red blood cells, which carry the hemoglobin, which has 4 alpha genes and 2 beta genes, we have a beautiful pocket where the oxygen is carried in between all of these folds of proteins. The alpha globin gene is on chromosome 16, and beta globin gene is on chromosome 11. And you can see that initially in the fetal period, the 4 alpha chains link with gamma chains, that is fetal hemoglobin. Then The delta chains are something that contribute to hemoglobin A2. And from the fetal hemoglobin, we switch to adult hemoglobin, which has 2 beta chains round about 3rd to 6 months. And this switch is very important. So the chromosome 11 codes for gamma chain, delta chain and beta chain, and they're all very close to each other. So if there's a big chunk missing, then both delta and beta thalassemia, beta globin genes are knocked off. If it's a small gene mutation, then only beta globin is knocked off. So this is something to remember, that adult hemoglobin has 4 alpha and 2 beta. Fetal hemoglobin has 4 alpha and 2 gamma, and hemoglobin A2 has 4 alpha and 2 delta, and there's a very small percentage in our blood. Hemoglobinopathy is a change in hemoglobin. It could be qualitative or quantitative. Qualitative means that there is a change in the gene, whereas quantitative, there is a reduction in the amount of protein. And Thal major, you know, it's an inherited blood disorder. And it's something that we have to worry about, because it not just has an impact on the child, but on the whole family. Genetic disorders have a huge impact on the whole family, and it's a global problem, because these children are tied for life. When you can't make blood, this is every month for the rest of their life. And above all, it is completely crazy that we can do prenatal counseling, testing, and prevent new births. And in this day and age, we are having a preventable disorder, and we are the thalassemia capital of the world and the COVID capital of the world. It's very sad that we are here where we are. Evolution, if you look at it, thalassemia carrier state is linked to malaria. So you can't see thalassemia, you never see in Caucasian population. The nature has made us in such a way that if we lack one beta globin gene, we are Thal carriers. If we have one sickle gene, we are sickle carriers. If we have one hemoglobin E gene, we are hemoglobin E carriers. And these give us natural protection against malaria. And the problem comes because in tribal areas or where carrier rates are high, there is consanguinity. And when two carriers are partners and they have a child, then there is a 25% risk to the baby. And Sindhi, Punjabi, Gujarati, Bengali, and Saurashtra population have the maximum in our country. And in Tamil Nadu, we have 3 pockets. One is the Coimbatore, Ooty, Kunur district. Another one we have in Dharmapuri in the Sitteri district. And then another one in the Tirunelveli, Ramnad area, where there is a lot of thalassemia major. So we have about 10,000 new births of thalassemia major every year. Most of them die as infant mortality. We don't even know in villages. Thalassemia major is autosomal recessive. Both parents are carriers. A carrier, how do you diagnose? They are completely asymptomatic. There's nothing wrong with them. If you see them, they are healthy. Some of them have been lifelong blood donors. They didn't even know that they were carriers. And by doing a simple test, we can detect thalassemia carriers. All of us do CBC. When we look at the machine printout, you look at the hemoglobin. Is it normal? Is it high? Or is it low? MCV tells you the size of the red blood cells. If it's low, look at the RBC count. If RBC count is low, this is iron deficiency. But the MCV is low, but the RBC count is in the high normal or in the higher than normal range. This is definitely abnormal indices, and we think of thalassemia carrier state. So this is the clue, and we all as medical practitioners have access to CBC results, and we can look at thalassemia carriers, because if 2 carriers have a baby, they have a chance of having a baby with this terrible condition called thalassemia major, where they present with a low hemoglobin. So the baby is diagnosed around about 3 to 4 months age, where the fetal hemoglobin is removed and the adult hemoglobin should kick in, but it's not happening. If you see this peripheral smear, you're seeing a lot of nucleated red cells. These nucleated red cells are counted as lymphocytes by a machine. So they can come with a low hemoglobin, a very high blood count of 25,000, 30,000. And most people think they have a leukemia or blood cancer sometimes, because they have a big liver, spleen. Sometimes they look ill, but all of these are nucleated red blood cells. And So we make a diagnosis of thalassemia major by looking at both the parents. They will have a low hemoglobin, low MCV, and elevated A2 on their HB electrophoresis. If you look at the baby will have low hemoglobin, low MCV, and all fetal hemoglobin. So there is no adult hemoglobin at all. So that is confirmatory of beta thalassemia. Sometimes the baby comes to us after the transfusion, and people often say, I'll have to wait for 3 months because you've been transfused, we can't do HB electrophoresis. But this is no longer the case because we have other methods of testing. I will come to that. The HB electrophoresis is done on red blood cells. And we used to run these called the gel electrophoresis. And we have controls for hemoglobin A, F, S, and C, and the baby will have only fetal hemoglobin. But this is not what we do anymore. We have a rapid method of testing called HPLC, and this is really good for mass screening. So just take a minute to look at the HPLC, how to interpret it. The y-axis tells how much of the protein is there, and the x-axis tells you in what time point they have come out of the machine. So you feed the the globin chain into the machine, and the fatter ones, they move very slowly, and the thinner ones move very fast. So the ones that are thinner and smaller proteins, they have a retention time of 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So they come out early, whereas the ones that are fatter come out late at 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. So this is how we do the mass screening. So in a normal HPLC, you will first between 1 and 2 minutes see one small peak of fetal hemoglobin. Hemoglobin F is very fast. F stands for fast. So it comes out early. Then you have a high peak of normal hemoglobin A, and then you have a tiny peak of fetal hemoglobin, hemoglobin A2 between 3 to 4 minutes. So this is normal. In a patient with THAL carrier, A2 is elevated. So if you see this, then you know that they have a thalassemia carrier state. Whereas if it's fetal hemoglobin alone, this is a child with thalassemia major, 100% fetal hemoglobin. So we look at both parents have elevated A2, child has only fetal hemoglobin. This is diagnostic of thalassemia major. So the other condition I said is delta beta thalassemia, where both delta and beta thalassemia, beta globin genes are knocked out. There also you will get a similar picture, but both parents will have an elevated fetal hemoglobin, 5-7% fetal hemoglobin. What happens to the children that come after transfusion? Transfusion is only red blood cells. So we can work on the white blood cells. We can do what is called gene testing. There are totally 400 different genes that cause thalassemia major, but 95% of patients have only 5 common genes. So these 5 common genes, we call them IBS 1 to 5, IBS 1 to 1, codon 8/9. This codon 8/9 and codon 4142 are the predominant gene mutations in the Coimbatore area, and 619 BP deletion. So even after transfusion, we can make a diagnosis of thalassemia major on the white blood cells by doing gene mutation studies. And remember that the diagnosis doesn't stop with just looking at your child. You have to look at the whole family and make sure that the diagnosis means counseling for that family and the extended family. So this is the little boy whom you saw in the first picture, the mother who was a PhD student. He's now waiting to get into college. He's had a successful bone marrow transplantation and is now thalassemia free. But not every child has this opportunity. So our job is mainly to pick out, if you see some child coming with slight anemia, if you look at what is their blood indices and whether we can diagnose a carrier state or major state, but counsel the family and make sure extended family, the mom's brothers, sisters, dad's brothers, sisters, everyone is aware, so that we can prevent new births. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sir, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Revati, for your clear, understandable talk, which can be for everybody. Shall we go on to the next speaker? We'll go on to the next speaker, Dr. Maithili. Can we? Hello?
Yes, sir. Please
Yes.
go ahead.
Dr. Maithili, she will, as a director of Blood Bank Voluntary Health Service, Chennai, doing blood bank service for more than 25 years and involved in providing blood for these children, thalassemia children, without whose sincere efforts, it will be very difficult to get blood for these thalassemia, particularly in this COVID pandemic situation, where every blood donor is hesitant to donate blood. So I will go and call Dr. Maithili, and she is the ideal person to enlighten us on the principles of transfusion therapy in thalassemia. Dr. Maithili, please. Yes, go on, Maithili.
You have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you, Maithili. Maithili, we're not able to hear you. We can't hear you. Yeah, you have to unmute yourself.
She's unmuted. I think her headphone is the problem.
Ah.
Can you disconnect from the headphone and speak directly, ma'am? Maithili, ma'am?
Okay.
Headphone எடுத்துட்டு பேசுங்க.
Disconnect the headphone from the system.
System.
No, we can't hear you yet. If you can completely disconnect the headphone from the system. Can you talk now and let's see if we can hear you?
Not yet.
No.
No. Something. No, no. We are
We
not
can't
able to.
hear. No. Mm. Will you rejoin and we can see if that works? No. No, we can't hear. Mhm.
At the time she corrects, shall we go for next speaker?
Yes,
What do you think?
Yeah. I think we will. No.
Not audible.
Something wrong.
She was audible in the beginning.
If you are in the blood bank, I could see Jayanti sister there. So maybe from their phone you can talk.
Maybe we can finish the next topic before Madam.
I think she's just got one of. No. Okay, we will do chelation and then maybe come back to you, Maithili. Shall we do that?
I think so.
It's okay. Okay.
Because there are some sisters in the blood bank and from their phone she'll be able to.
Yes.
Now we can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Audible now?
Yes.
I think I can talk now. Yeah.
Slightly,
okay.
So,
volume.
Okay.
yeah.
Please proceed. Yeah.
Sorry. First of
If we-
all, I
Yeah.
take this opportunity to thank IAP
Maithili, something wrong.
and Coimbatore chapter for giving me this opportunity on to talk on principles of transfusion therapy.
Not very clear.
I think she has got two devices.
Maithili, sorry. Maithili, sorry, if you can come off your device. If you can come off your device and use the other device, otherwise there's interference.
We are
Too much
being
interference.
confirmed. And and when the child hemoglobin is less than 7 grams of anemia being excluded. Yes.
Dr. Fauzia, you can make a call to.
Yeah,
No, clarity is not there.
please proceed. Yeah, please
Yeah.
proceed.
Is Maithili ma'am there online?
It is optimal transfusion. It is, though it is a conventional method of treatment for thalassemia, still it is being practiced. It has got its important role in the treatment of thalassemia till the patient goes for bone marrow transplantation. And coming to the standard of care, safe blood transfusion is needed for these patients. When I mean safe transfusion, there should not be any transfusion transmittable infections, or there should not be any transfusion reactions when it is being given to the patient. And coming to the optimal transfusion, we keep always the hemoglobin level at pre-transfusion level always at more than 9 grams, so that there will be adequate oxygenation in the patient, and it will ensure good optimal growth, and there will be suppression of extramedullary erythropoietic changes like any skeletal changes, and it will avoid hypersplenism. Next. And coming to the various products of blood, we prefer leukodepleted packed red cells for these patients. Once, usually, blood is collected from voluntary blood donors, because the safety of blood transfusion starts from the selection of the donors. So the collected volume is usually 350 ml or 450 ml capacity, and is collected in a preservative solution, CPD-A1 solution. And it is separated into various components like Paxils, FFP platelets, and cryoprecipitate. The one that is needed for thalassemia is packed red cells, and that should be leukodepleted one. And we add some additive solution like sargam, adenine, glucose, and mannitol, so that we can keep these packed cells for 42 days. And once the screening, once the blood is collected, component is being made, we do stick screening test by nucleic acid amplification test, NAT, or antigen antibody testing like ELISA. And when the patient comes to us, when we counsel the new parents, usually we ask them to provide at least 10 voluntary donors for each patient, so that the patient will not be exposed to different antigens. And we do, of course, the standard liver enzyme test, and we do strictly the blood grouping, typing, and the extended red cell antigenic typing, especially for the RH antigens, capital C, small c, and capital E and small e. And we usually identify any antibodies have been there in the blood before giving transfusion. And optimal transfusion, usually there are various types of transfusion regime, but the one we follow is a moderate transfusion regime. And here the volume required is 220 ml per kg per year, that is required, or 10 to 15 ml per kg once in 3 to 4 weeks we give them. And so if you give this optimal transfusion, like once in 10 to 15 ml per kg for 3 to 4 weeks, it will avoid, it will prevent all bone changes and hypersplenism, and usually it avoids splenectomy. And if you give adequate transfusion, you will avoid, see the picture is, it shows the girl and the boy of the same age group. You can see the difference because of the inadequate transfusion. The other picture showing the splenomegaly in patients not being adequately transfused. And when you give blood transfusion for a patient, you should be, the environment should be a very safe environment. You should be well lighted, well ventilated, and because it is a lifetime process for them. And it should be, the atmosphere should be so calm and pleasant. And we paint the pictures of the walls with some theme, and we keep a TV program for them. And so that children can watch TV while getting transfusion. And our transfusion center started in 2016 till the last 16 years. People are they love to come for blood transfusion. Whenever they come, we can see their happy faces. And we separately allotted a separate refreshment room, so that before waiting for blood transfusion, we are just to keep them self-engaged by giving drawings, music, and everything. And coming to blood transfusion, when you give for the children, pre-medication 100% it is avoided unless otherwise there is an indication. If they have got a history of severe allergic reactions, we can give aviltakatron. Otherwise, better to avoid all pre-medications. And there is no need for Lasix injection at all. Unless there is an impending cardiac failure or any cardiac overload, if you suspect, you can give this pre-medication injection. Otherwise, it is not at all needed. And this thalassemia center, you should be like a home for all thalassemic children. And we have got a separate team dedicated for this patients to give transfusion. We have got, the doctor daily assess the patient, how much ml to be given, what is the iron status, and what is the frequency, what's the fall of hemoglobin in each patient. And there is a separate trained sister should be there. And she is very good in IV canalization, and she maintains all the records. And there is an administrative team to give appointments for these children. And coming to the blood safety, I already told you, these children should receive leukodepleted red cells. Of course, sometimes we prepare saline wash red cells also needed, especially in patients who have history of severe allergic type of reactions. And of course, cryopreserved red cells also being used in patients where there are rare development of antibodies, and we can give prepared neocytes also sometimes. And we need very good networking and media for these children. Because the important raw material for any blood bank or any for these transfusion is blood, which can be obtained from only voluntary blood donors. So we have got a large donor database, and we have got a tie-up with various organizations, so that whenever there is a need for these blood for these children, they immediately contact them and asking them to come and donate. And sometimes we request the donors also to adopt some 3 or 4 children, so that once in 3 months they can.
Ma'am, Maithili ma'am, you have to unmute.
Maithili, you're muted. Please unmute yourself.
And regularly, in spite of taking adequate precautions, still giving a conventional method of blood transfusion, still we face so many difficulties and challenges are there compared to the stem cell transplantation regarding the survival and management of these children. And optimal chelation starts with the optimal transfusion. And I told you that is a leukodepleted red cells should be done. And this leukodepletion can be done in the pre-storage condition itself. So pre-storage leukodepletion is the ideal of all leukodepletion methods. The other ways are just, that is a lab site filter. That is, we prepare the packed cells, allow it to pass through the filter and then store it. And the third method is to prepare the red cells and then using the filter only at the time of transfusion. Out of all inline filters, before storing the red cells, if you do leukodepletion, it is well and good. And this blood should be already screened by standard screening test methods. And sometimes we may go for less than neocytes of less than 2 weeks old by apheresis method. So in spite of giving optimal transfusion and safe transfusion, we should always aim for a better tomorrow. And that is recently a drug called, recently has come, luspatercept drug has come. It is actually a fusion protein where there is a human reactivin combined with the immunoglobulin, gamma immunoglobulin. So in case of ineffective erythropoiesis, it just goes and combined with the transforming beta factors, and so that there will be adequate maturation. And this really helps that 33% of burden, transfusion burden will be there in future for these children that we expect. So, so for an ideal transfusion center, there should be a separate trained team should be there, and the children should be taken care of right from when they enter the center and goes off. We have to take care of them. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Maithili, for the practical aspect of transfusion. I am sure VHS Blood Bank follows COVID precautions in the approved around blood bank. Thank you. Shall we go for the next speaker? Shall I invite Dr. Venkateswar, a consultant and person who is very much interested in treating hematological problems, and he will be talking and to us about ideal chelation therapy in thalassemia. Hello, Mr. Venkateswar.
Thank you, sir. I would like to thank the IAP Coimbatore chapter and Dr. Revati ma'am for giving me the opportunity for presenting the advances in iron chelation. So over to the topic. So we all know that once a child is being diagnosed with thalassemia, the child will require lifelong transfusion. So with each unit of blood, there is 200 milligram of iron being delivered to the child each time. And the iron, as we know, that is actually active metal, which is there is always shifting between ferrous and ferric form, and each with a reaction, there is the production of the reactive oxygen species, which will damage the cell organelle, particularly the plasma membrane and the mitochondria and all the cellular organelles, which leads to fibrosis. Though predominant organs being hit being the liver, which leads to liver fibrosis, cirrhosis, and even they can go for hepatocellular carcinoma. And the cardiac dysfunction can be a complication of the iron overload. And endocrine organs, particularly the pituitary, thyroid, and pancreas, islet cells can be get hit by the iron overload, leading to diabetes mellitus, leading to various manifestations of iron overload. Particularly, they can have a short stature, hypothyroidism, infertility, and diabetes as a part of endocrine dysfunction, skin pigmentation due to iron overload and iron deposition in the skin, and liver failure, cardiac failure due to the deposition of iron in the liver and cardiac muscle. So how to assess the iron overload? So there are various investigations being detected over the period of time. So liver biopsy is actually the gold standard investigation, which will give us give us the idea of milligram of iron per gram of liver, but it is an invasive procedure not done in all parts of the world, country and the world. Second is the serial estimation of the serum ferritin. This is actually least invasive and it is easily available in all the centers, but it has various pros and cons, and it should be always tested after 10 to 15 transfusions are over. The recent investigation is the liver or heart T2 star MRI, which is available in all other centers also, and it is a non-invasive method to detect the iron overload. Next slide. So what is the basic principle of the iron chelation? So the basic principle is, we all know that the iron which is not absorbed will be usually excreted through the denudation of the intestinal cells. So however, when the iron comes to our body through a transfusion, how it is being excreted? It has to be excreted either through the urine or through the feces. So that is made possible by the iron chelation. So the ideal iron chelator should be an oral preparation ideally, and that has limited or no toxicity, and it's not very expensive, so that it can be made available or affordable by most of our patients. Next slide. So that is, we should know when to start a chelation for each child, not immediately after diagnosis or not immediately after starting the transfusion. The ideal age is actually more than 18 months or at least 2 years or older. When the child is diagnosed, then the child should be started on transfusion. And ideally after 10 to 20 transfusion only, the chelation should be started. And when the ferritin is more than 1000 microgram per deciliter or nanogram per deciliter, it should be started. The dosing should be tailored according to the transfusional iron intake, because we need to maintain the iron balance. We should not just treat the ferritin alone, because iron is also essential for other basic metabolism needs also. So we also need to always maintain the balance. So the aim of cardiac iron by the cardiac T2 MRI should be more than 20 milliseconds, and liver iron concentration should be less than 7 milligram per gram of dry weight. So only up to, we have to have a target where we should give the chelation also. Coming to the chelation, we all know there are 3 main drugs available as an iron chelating agent. One is the desferrioxamine, deferriprone, and deferrirox. So I'll be in the next few slides, I'll be going through each one of them individually. And as we know, the desferrioxamine is a hexadentate. That means it binds with iron molecule in 1:1 ratio. The dose is actually 25 to 40 milligram per kg per day over 8 to 24 hours. Whereas when a child presents with severe congestive cardiac failure, we can go as an emergency rescue therapy up to 60 milligram per kg per day. It has to be given either subcutaneous route or by intravenous route. The main disadvantage here is that it is actually the potent chelating agent, but it has a very short half-life. The half-life is only 20 to 30 minutes, and the route of excretion be urinary and fecal excretion. It works best for the liver iron removal when compared to the cardiac iron removal. And since it has a shortest half-life, it requires prolonged subcutaneous administration, which leads to the complaints issue among the children. So the maximum dose uses 40 milligram per kg per day, and it also has a toxicity, particularly to the eye, ear, particularly sensory neural hearing loss and growth plate arrest. Because of this reason only, that is less preferable to you start the chelation less than 18 months of age. And it has been shown that adding vitamin C 2 to 3 milligram per kg per day orally during the desferal helps in improving the iron excretion. Coming to the next slide, this children who is on continuous subcutaneous infusion always needs a proper counseling, because the compliance is actually an issue in these children to continue subcutaneous infusion throughout their life. So the counseling and the compliance is very, very important when before starting a child on iron chelation, particularly with the IV desferal. Then comes the oral forms. One is the deferriprone, which is actually bidentate. The maximum dose is 100 milligram per kg per day, whereas it can be used anywhere between 20 to 75 milligram per kg per day or 25 milligram per kg per dose. The total dose is 75 milligram per kg per day in 3 divided doses. The half-life is around 3 hours. It is predominantly excreted through the urine, and it works well on the cardiac iron when compared to the liver. Defersirox is a tridentate, that is the dose is 20 to 40 milligram per kg per day once daily. The importance is it can be given once daily, and it should be given, it is available as an orally dispersible tablet. The half-life is prolonged, like up to 7 to 16 hours. So that made a attractive option for once daily chelation. The route of excretion being feces, and it also works better on the liver iron removal. So Defersirox dose is actually up to 20 to 40 milligram per kg per day, as said in the previous slide. It should be given in an empty stomach. It has to be crushed and dissolved in water or orange juice in a glass tumbler, and it should be consumed. Whereas now the recent Defersirox is the Defersirox FCT, which is a film-coated capsule. There it has no interaction with the food. So even after meals also, the children can consume the Defersirox. So there are various preparations available and brands available in India. We should know that each brand has different strength. So for example, Asundra is available in 100 and 400 milligram tablets. Desirox and Defrijet is 250 and 500 milligram tablet, and Decifer is 500 and 400 milligram tablets. The Defrijet FCT, which is the film coated capsule, is available in 90, 180 and 360 milligram strength. So the dose in Defrijet FCT is 18 to 28 milligram per kg per day, which is equivalent of the 40 milligram per kg per day of Desirox. So Deferriprone, as we said earlier, it is 75 milligram per kg per day. It actually gives, when the iron is chelated and excreted through the urine, both desferal and Deferriprone will cause urine color to be orange or red. So we have to highlight this point to the parent that this is not hematuria, and this is expected side effect of the iron chelation. The dreaded complication of Deferriprone being the agranulocytosis, that is when the neutrophil count can crash suddenly, and most of the patients can have joint pain, and arthralgia is also a side effect. So these two are the dose limiting side effects, and agranulocytosis can be idiosyncratic reaction to the Deferriprone also. It actually works, as said earlier, best for the heart iron, and it is not a potent chelator, but it is best suited when it is used as a combination chelation. So next, actually, we all know that working as an individual is always a difficult. When we are working as a team, it works better. So that helps in thalassemia also. That is called a shuttle hypothesis. So we are using a combination of chelation. So whenever we are using a single chelating drug, we are not finding it, we are not having an optimal outcome, or when the ferritin is not coming down as we are expected, then we can use a chelating drug along with another chelating drug. The combination most commonly used is the desferrioxamine with the Deferriprone. So what is happening here is the Deferriprone, being a small molecule, will go inside the cell. Being a lipophilic, it will go inside the cell. It will bind the labile iron from the cell. It will bring out extracellularly, and it will the extracellular iron will be now chelated by the desferal, which is in the circulation. So in this way, they work hand in hand to decrease the iron, and this combination chelation is very well suited also. So there are various combinations available. As said earlier, it could be like desferrioxamine plus deferiprone, which is best suited for high risk, high iron overload patients. Defersirox is also used along with deferiprone. Here we have an added advantage being both of them being oral chelator. It also helps to reduce the cardiac iron. Defersirox plus desferrioxamine also helps to improve compliance. As for example, the patient is on daily desferal injection. When we are adding defersirox, we can change the daily injections to alternative, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they can have desferal injection, and other days they can have the defersirox tablet as orally daily. So this helps the chelation compliance to be improved in these children. So in our experience of the total cohort 215 patients, the age limit is from like 7 months to 39 years. Male is to female ratio of 1:3, 1.3:1, and 93% of the children who are getting treated in voluntary health service is below poverty line. So they are getting both chelation and transfusion under the CM health insurance scheme. So still a proper and ideal chelation can be available to all of our children in our country. So in real world experience, when to start a chelation, as said in the previous slides. So it should be started when the ferritin is more than 1000 and the cutoff should be always more than 18 months. Liver iron content calculation and estimation is not feasible in all the centers as it is invasive procedure. And in thalassemia, they always have coagulopathy risk also because of the liver fibrosis and cirrhosis. So it is not an easy and safe option. Hepatitis C is always a confounding factor. As Maithili ma'am was telling, they are on a prolonged monthly transfusion. We should screen them for viral reactivation. And particularly when they are having hepatitis C reactivation, they can have high ferritin level. So we should not always think about ferritin is because of iron overload. We always should screen them for viral screening when they are having disproportionately high ferritin. So hepatitis C is still a confounding factor in the ferritin. Cardiac MRI is actually feasible only when the child is more than 7 years. One is because these children will require less than, for example, 2 years, 3 years children will require sedation. And most important thing is age matched control is not available for less than 7 years. So interpretation is also difficult in these children. Serial serum ferritin is actually an ideal indicator. Single value of ferritin doesn't have much role. So the ferritin has to be followed up serially rather than to depending on a single value. The median as from our report as per 2012, the median ferritin was from 106 to 15,400. So even when the ferritin is low, we should always see them clinically because they can have tissue iron overload also. So that has also be kept in mind. So monitoring efficacy of the chelation, either when cardiac MRI is available, we can do the cardiac MRI and we can see whether the T2 star MRI that if that's improving from less than 10 milliseconds to more than 20 milliseconds, which is the our cutoff. So we can monitor either through a cardiac MRI or through the serial serum ferritin level also. Liver MRI is also there. When available, we have to follow the cutoff for the liver MRI. Whereas liver iron concentration, if we are measuring, we have to tailor it up to less than 7 milligram per gram, but it is not done nowadays. So, but that is the cutoff for stopping the chelation. So we have to maintain the chelation less than 7 milligram per gram of liver weight. And compliance, as said earlier, always when a child is started on chelation, compliance should be considered, and whenever they're coming for transfusion, again and again they have to be counseled the importance of chelation because it is a long-term process, and once they have started on chelation, we should not just abandon them. We have to always counsel them. We have to keep on monitoring them, and our idea is to keep the ferritin less than 2000. Usually here we'll be following CBC every month before transfusion to see whether they are getting the optimal transfusion to maintain the HB between 9 to 10.5 gram per deciliter. Then serum creatinine SGPT should be checked every 3 months because we know that Deferox is metabolized by the liver, excreted through the kidney. So whenever they are having chelation, these should be monitored regularly. And ferritin ideally 3 months, if not at least 6 monthly once we have to check ferritin. And as said earlier, viral screening should be done once a year, and also we should monitor the growth of these children yearly, so that because they can have iron overload induced growth retardation or because of the chelation over toxicity also. So we also should balance everything in as a for individual child. Patient education and counseling and motivation is actually the key to optimal transfusion and ideal chelation. So having said that, the children can be kept on proper transfusion and optimal chelation should be maintained in each children, so that they will have optimal outcome also. Thank you.
Thank you. Desikalu sir, you have to unmute, sir.
Thank you, Venkatesh, for the illustrious talk on iron overload therapy, which is a major problem we face in day-to-day practice, aiming to reduce the morbidity and mortality in time. So, shall we go for the next speaker? Dr. Harika. She is one of the team members of bone marrow transplant unit in Apollo Hospital, working with Dr. Revathiraj, and will speak on management of complications in thalassemia. Harika, please.
Good morning, sir. Thank you, sir, and thank you for the IAP chapter, and thank you, Preeti ma'am, for giving us this opportunity. Today, I will be speaking on management of complications. Next slide, ma'am. The main complications, one of the main complications are infections, of which viral infections like hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV. These are transfusion induced, and syphilis, the bacterial infection, is also one of the complications. But these days, HIV and syphilis have been reduced, but hepatitis B and hepatitis C are still the problems with transfusion, regular transfusion in these children. We have presented a data in Indian Journal of Hematology Blood Transfusion in 2018. Out of the total 215 children, 47% of the children had hepatitis C in the cohort, and we used previously before 2016 pegylated interferon and was used, which showed only 66.6% of the response, while when we started using ledipasvir and sofosbuvir combination, it showed 100% response in the children. And also with regards to cost, the combination of ledipasvir and sofosbuvir combination has less cost when compared to the pegylated interferon. So 6 months duration treatment with ledipasvir is effective in treating the hepatitis C virus. The main strategies for prevention of these viral infections is all the children with thalassemia should be vaccinated for hepatitis B, and booster hepatitis B vaccine should be given every 5 years, and always use screen donors for the blood transfusion. And we need to monitor SGPT levels every 3 monthly. This is not only for viral infections, but since these children are on chelation, SGPT should be monitored, and annual viral screening should be done for hepatitis B, C, and HIV virus. And to prevent the cytomegalovirus infections, leukodepleted PRBC, pre-transfusion leukodepletion should be done, but pre-storage leukodepletion is the ideal. And if there is sudden jump in ferritin or jaundice, always keep in mind of hepatitis virus and screen for it. And as we know that there is no optimal therapy for hepatitis B once we get it. So other than oral nucleoside and nucleotide analogs, but is not optimal. And as we discussed, hepatitis C virus, ledipasvir or sofosbuvir or ribavirin plus pegylated interferon combination for 6 to 12 months can remove the virus completely. And with regards to alloimmunization, it is mostly seen in children who start the transfusion in a later age rather than the children who start early transfusions once the diagnosis is made. It is almost seen in 7 to 10% of the thalassemia children. And with this low transfusion and Alumnization. Splenectomy was indicated in almost 7% of the children because of the hypersplenism which these children develop. And to prevent alumnization, as Maithili ma'am was saying, we need to do the typing of the blood of the PRBC, and also committed donors. We can keep like 10 to 12 committed donors for each child, so that the same donors will be donating every 3 monthly, so that alumnization can be minimized in these children. And one of the other complications, endocrine complications. The main are initially first, whenever there is a blood transfusion program with chronic transfusion, first liver will get accumulated in the iron will be accumulated in the liver. That happens within 1 year. Then starts the endocrine complications. They are hypothyroidism, diabetes because of the accumulation of iron in the pancreas, then panhypopituitarism, osteoporosis because of the low gonadal hormones, and hypoparathyroidism, gonadal failure because of the and delayed puberty, and growth retardation because of the low growth hormone in these children. And what is the role of endocrinologist? The puberty needs to be supervised in these children because between 10 to 15 years, there should not be any interruption in their puberty. This annual endocrinologist review should be done in these children. And even in the third decade, older children also should be, older patients also should be the endocrinologist, because the main because of the also has to be done. And as Dr. Venkatesh has told, that optimal chelation is the main key for preventing these endocrinopathies. And coming to the cardiac complications, it is mainly because of the iron overload and not using the chelation optimally. It causes in form of cardiomyopathy or electrical disturbances and arrhythmias. And when right heart failure starts, pulmonary hypertension followed by can be done. And even in splenectomy patients, because of the high platelet count, pulmonary hypertension can happen. So if any child post splenectomy platelet count is more than 7,000 to 8,000, prophylactic antiplatelet therapy like aspirin should be started in these children to prevent the secondary pulmonary hypertension. And this is a study, prospective study done between 2015 to 2019 among the total 100 children. With regards to cardiac MRI, T2 weighted cardiac MRI to find out the cardiac iron overload, which is a non-invasive method. Out of the total 100 children, 70% of the children had a T2 star MRI value between 10 to 20, while 24% of the children had less than 10, which means this is the relaxation time of the heart in the diastolic phase. If there is heart is taking more time to relax, means it is relaxing properly, so the normal should be more than 20. And if it is taking less time to relax, it's not able to relax properly, then it will be less than 10. So severe heart failure means less than 10. Almost 24% of the children had severe iron overload, and moderate in 70%, and only 6% of the children had no iron overload in this cohort. And one of the other complications is bone disease. This is mainly due to the marrow expansion due to the under transfusion in these children, and also due to the low calcium. Hence, high calcium diet should be explained to the children, and vitamin D deficiency, and gonadal failure, and lack of sex hormones, because these are required for the growth of the bone also. So these are the main causes of bone disease in these children. So overall, most prevention of the bone disease is active lifestyle with plenty of exercise. The children and parents should be counseled regarding the importance of the exercise and not to follow the sedentary life. And calcium-rich diet should be explained to the children. And before meals, encourage the children to have milk or tea, because it decreases the iron absorption from the food. And whenever the children are taking salads or fruits, let them take 2 hours before or 2 hours after the meals, because of the vitamin C rich in these fruits and salads. It increases the iron absorption. So we should maintain at least 2 hours gap between the meals, and regular vitamin D replacement every 6 monthly, along with the calcium daily, because these children have active growth, and also because of the active lifestyle. Ma'am, next slide, ma'am. And take home points in these children are always optimal transfusion should be done to prevent the bone changes and congestive cardiac failure, and optimal chelation to prevent endocrine complications, and always screened and leukodepleted products should be used to prevent the viral infections in these children, and calcium and vitamin D supplementation should be done to prevent the bone disease, and regular follow-up of the, as Dr. Venkatesh was saying, CBC every monthly, SGPT, creatinine every 3 monthly, ferritin every 3 to 6 monthly, and growth and endocrine monitoring every month, every yearly, and viral markers every yearly should be followed in these children, so that they can be picked early and treated accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harika, for the useful talk in looking after for complications and management, which we see more often in thalassemics because of the increased longevity due to regular transfusion they are receiving nowadays. So now the next speaker, should I call upon the next speaker? An important talk on prevention is better than cure. Holds good, more so in particular for thalassemics. And prenatal diagnostic approaches will be discussed by Dr. Satish Meena, also a team member of Apollo Hemato-Oncology Unit. Right.
Thank you, sir.
Satish?
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, all. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, ma'am, for providing this opportunity to present this important topic of antenatal diagnosis and genetic counseling. So I will discuss about this important topic. One request, all of this here. Please take one message from this important talk, which I'm going to talk about in few coming slides. Because thalassemia is a preventable disease, we can know that thalassemia is a preventable disease, and Mediterranean countries like Greece and Cyprus, they were thalassemia prevalent few years back, but because of awareness and because of genetic counseling and prenatal diagnosis, those have become thalassemia free. So if they can do it, we also can do it. So now it's a time, it's a need of time that we all work together to make our country thalassemia free. And this study, it shows that when we surveyed population with caretakers, we found that in about 100 caretakers, when we asked them about the awareness in the thalassemia, that is an inherited disorder, a family screening of a sibling, and antenatal diagnosis, that can make a significant change, but the awareness is quite low, and 50% people only aware about the condition. Next slide, please, ma'am. We know about the genetics of thalassemia, that alpha gene on chromosome 16 and beta gene on chromosome 11, they are coded on these chromosomes. One gene mutation leads to carrier status, 2 gene mutation results in affected child. But the thing is, at the carrier or is a thalassemia patient, they will be absolutely normal, because fetal to adult hemoglobin change, it happens at the age of 3 to 6 months. So obstetrician, they don't know that they have even delivered a thalassemia carrier or thalassemia patient. Our job as a pediatrician, so here it comes our job to raise the awareness about this condition and to prevent the thalassemia birth. So we know that thalassemia, it is an autosomal recessive condition when two partners who are thalassemia trait. In that condition, there are chances of birth of thalassemia major patient in 25% patients on offspring, and there are chances that 50% offspring will be thalassemia carrier. India is the world's thalassemia capital. So because now the approximately annual incidence is about 10,000 births every year. That is a very huge number for a condition which is preventable. So our job is to detect the carrier. So if we find a mother who is hypochromic microcytic, has hypochromic microcytic anemia, especially in a prevalent condition like in our state, like Coimbatore, Kannur, Ooty, or Tirunelveli or Dharmapuri, these are the districts which are high prevalent areas. So in these conditions, if we find a mother who is hypochromic microcytic anemic and who has high red cell count, we should always suspect a thalassemia carrier. In that mother, then we should perform a hemoglobin electrophoresis. And if we find that A2 hemoglobin level is high in that mother, so we should confirm a carrier status. In that condition, we should further test the father, because in that is autosomal recessive condition, there are chances of 25% chances of the offspring being thalassemia major. Next slide, ma'am. So there comes a genetic mutation. So all over the world, there are 400 different mutations which are causative for beta thalassemia major. But in India, about 95% children, they have 5 of these following mutation: IVS 1 to 5, IVS 1 to 1, codon 8 to 9, codon 41/42, and 619 base pair deletion. So these 5 mutations cover the 95% population of thalassemia affected. So we can do the genetic testing for these 5 mutations. So we should perform a genetic mutation testing in the family to identify which mutation the child has. Also, if a mother and father and the extensive family typing, genetic typing should be done. And when then the family is planning the next pregnancy, so during the antenatal diagnosis, the next fetus should be tested. There are different testing methods available according to the timing. So if the mother, the next pregnancy, she is presenting to us between the gestation of 10 to 14 weeks, we can do chorionic venous sampling. If between the 14 weeks to 18 weeks, we can do amniocentesis, or if she presents later than 18 weeks, we can do chordocentesis. So we should test the fetus if the fetus is normal or heterozygous or homozygous for that mutation. If the fetus is homozygous for the mutation, it needs termination of the pregnancy to avoid the second birth of the second thalassemia births in the same family. So this is the method of chorionic venous sampling, which is shown in the picture when the mother comes in the age of gestation of 10 to 14 weeks. So all the family, we should screen all the family members, extended family typing, extended typing for all the family. Common thing in few communities in India and also in southern India. So we should of this, we should raise awareness among. So thalassemia carrier, how to identify thalassemia carrier? They won't have any symptoms or any illness. They will be like normal, like as Rekhi ma'am was discussing in the first talk.
Your voice is not too clear, Satish. Sorry to interrupt, Satish. Your voice is not too clear. Can you come near the mic and speak? Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. Am I audible now, ma'am? Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay, sir. So for the carrier, they will not have any symptoms, or they will not suffer any illness. Like ma'am was saying, they can be a regular blood donor also, the carrier, but they have diagnosed by weekly blood test on the high suspicion rate. A mother to be carrier, we can do nested osmotic fragility test. Very simple bedside test. It has to detect the thalassemia carrier. It should be implemented. It is proposed to be implemented, but it's not thalassemia patient. If we take the 2 ml of thalassemia blood of thalassemia mother, if we she is thalassemia carrier. In that condition, there will be low osmotic fragility. So that result in we're not able to see that line after the test tube. So which is, if we keep the test tube also in control of test, when we compare the control, we compare the patient, there will be a loss of the transparency, which is a method of detecting a thalassemia carrier. Next slide, ma'am. So school camps should be done to raise awareness, because it is a thalassemia is a preventable disease. We should raise among, there is a stigma when the family birth of a child. People don't talk about the birth of the diagnosis of the child, because there is a genetic labeling that it is a genetic diagnosis. They don't talk about, so people should be more aware about talking about the condition. So Citri camp, Citri is a district in Dharmapuri. When their surveillance was done, they were found that they were 23% carrier rate. That is quite high for a area for the carrier status. So these camps should be done in all the prevalent, all the thalassemia endemic areas. And Rotary Club formation, these camp formation are helpful in preventing the disease, preventing this birth. 5 common gene mutation, as we were talking about, the profiling beta thalassemia mutation. According to the state or the region, we can have a high suspicion rate for these genetic mutation, and we can test the antenatally the child for the following mutation. There should definitely no second birth of a thalassemia child in the same family. This should be this message should be carried forward to all the families and among all the treating physicians. Tamilabharani was a patient who was a thalassemia patient who was on regular transfusion from Coimbatore Government Hospital. When the mother was pregnant with the second baby, so the family underwent genetic counseling, genetic testing, and they found that patient, when the second baby was not genetically affected, it was given. So she became the donor for the Tamilabharani for the first sibling. And now this Tamilabharani is completely, after the transplantation, she is a completely normal college going child. So this is a story of that girl. The family underwent genetic counseling and prenatal diagnosis, and this made a lot of change in the family. So talking about the recent advances and about the technologies. So now we have the Savior siblings or designer baby, which is pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Now it is available in India, where baby in the match, a sibling is genetically modified, genetically matched sibling who does not have the genetic mutation is produced, who donates for the stem cells for the first child after the birth. So about the transplantation and about how it helps in cure, I will hand over the place to Ramya ma'am. She will discuss in detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Satish.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Satish, for your illustrious talk on the preventive aspect of TAN. The practical aspect is very difficult to put it in use, but still we are following the preventive aspects in Thalassemia Welfare Association with the help of Dr. Revati to bring this into use, practice. I will call upon the next speaker. Dr. Ramya Uppulidi, a hematologist and a key team member and a close associate of Dr. Revati Raj in rendering hematological service in Apollo Specialty, Chennai. She will be showing us the path step by step towards curative therapy, the blood and bone marrow transplant in thalassemics. Dr. Ramya, please.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And I just like to share that when I was doing my MBBS, I was a very headstrong and ambitious person, and probably still am, but to a lesser extent. And I always wanted to do public health. It was just my dream. And somehow Providence had it that I was able to train with Dr. Revati and watch what VHS, Thalassemia Welfare Association, does, and realize that actually, Providence brought me to what I wanted, because thalassemia major is one of the biggest public health problems in India. And I thank ma'am and VHS, Thalassemia Welfare Association, and IAP Coimbatore for coming up with this program so that we can work more on raising awareness in thalassemia. I'll be very brief with my talk. It's already 12:20, but we have a very nice quiz after this. So I'll just give you an outline on one of the curative options for thalassemia, which is hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, which is very much available in India. It is accessible through means, and it is something that we should be aware of and should counsel families right from the time of diagnosis. So the whole concept, as you can see in this picture, is of the seed and the soil. So we have the bone marrow inside the bone. The soil is the bone marrow, the seed is the stem cell, and from the stem cell you have the entire blood which is formed in the body. So you have red cells, white cells, and platelets. So the red cells is what we want to change when we talk about thalassemia. So when you're doing HSCT or BMT, as it is more commonly known as, you're changing these stem cells. Next slide, please. So the stem cell sources can be either from the peripheral blood or the bone marrow or the cord blood cells. But what stem cells we are talking about when we talk about HSCT are the stem cells which form specifically the red blood cells. So you have pluripotent and totipotent stem cells, and the stem cells which form organs are not the ones we are talking about. We are talking about stem cells which specifically form the hematopoietic system. Next slide, please. So the steps of stem cell transplantation start with the first step, which is finding a donor. So there is HLA typing is the first step for stem cell transplantation. So when we counsel families as well, we tell them, so just like if I am O positive blood group and you are O positive, I can donate blood for you. Similarly, for stem cell transplantation, there is a group which is the HLA typing, which is the bone marrow group. HLA stands for human leukocyte antigen, which is on chromosome 6. And we have two classes of HLA, which is class 1 and class 2. Class 1 has A, B, C. Class 2 has DR and DQ, more importantly. And looking at how much is the match between one person and the other, you determine who can be the donor. A very simple way of checking HLA is by just doing a cheek swab, a buccal swab, or you can do a blood test as well. So the chance of finding a match within the family, which means my brother being a match with me, a full match, is about 30%. My parents being a full match with me is about 5%. So about 35% children will probably have a match within the family. So what do we do about all the other people who don't have match? So 70% people will not have a match. That's where you have unrelated donor registries, where you have stem cells, unrelated donor registries, one of which is Datri, which is in Chennai, and it's one of the biggest registries in India. All of us can be stem cell donors. If you register with Datri, you just have to send your cheek swab, your buccal swab, and your HLA will be registered in their database. And anyone who is a match with them for a child. So when we have a child who doesn't have a family donor, we do unrelated donor searches through the databases, and whoever may be a match for the child is through the registries contacted, and that person can donate stem cells no matter where in India they are. They may be in Ahmedabad or Delhi or wherever, Andhra, whichever place, and they are collected there and then they are transported to the transplant center. Next slide, please. So just to go through an outline of transplantation, this is really how Dr. Revati has taught all of us of how to do transplantation and what transplant is. It's the 7 steps, like you have the Saptapadi in marriages. So the 7 steps, the first step is of course patient selection, then donor selection, then you condition, which means I already told you the concept is of a seed and a soil. So you want to prepare the soil by conditioning, which means you give medicine so that you're preparing the soil, and then you're giving the seed, which is the stem cells. Then you give them the stem cells, you provide supportive care so that their body takes that much time for those stem cells to settle within the body. And then you give medicine such that they maintain those stem cells and can lead as much a normal life as the rest of us. Next slide, please. So the first step is patient selection. So there was always a debate till many years ago that younger the age, the better. It still holds true, younger the age, the better, but now age is not a barrier. There was this magic 7-year age cutoff earlier, but this was before we had more advances in some of the drugs which are used for transplantation and some of the supportive care. Therefore, in today's day and age is not a barrier. Anyone at whatever age, even older age children, 12, 13, 14, can be transplanted if they have been taken care of properly in terms of transfusion and chelation. However, earlier is still the better before the ferritin load in the body is high. Now, adult thals also, there is a chance to be cured from by transplantation. So I think there was a question in chat box which Dr. Janaki Srinivasan had asked. How do you determine who is the best patient for transplantation? Any patient with a stem cell condition which can be cured by stem cell transplantation is a patient for transplantation. Of course, if it's an adult thal, if it's an older thal who's had years and years of transfusion and years of chelation, you will need to prepare them before you take them up for transplantation. But that doesn't mean that they cannot be transplanted. So this is where the concept of class 1, 2, and 3 thalassemia comes along. So basically you decide what class they are based on their ferritin value, on how well they have been chelated and how big the liver size is. So this is data from CMC Vellore from India itself, where they found that children who are more than 7 years of age and who have a liver size more than 5 centimeter are at higher risk of complications due to transplantation. So therefore, earlier the better, but chelation and transfusion is more important than the age. The next step is the donor. So you, like I said already, 30% children can find a donor within the family. 70% you look for outside donors. So the kind of donor that you're using will determine a lot of how your outcome is. So how they go in terms of engraftment, how much is the risk of getting graft versus host disease, and what is the risk of getting graft rejection. Next slide, please. So again, the first step obviously is to find a family donor. If you have a family donor, nothing like it. And what we mean by family donor is either the sibling or the parents. Considering the consanguinity rates in our country, and especially in Tamil Nadu, there are families where grandparents also have been donors because they have been a full match if they are healthy enough to donate. So it's not wrong to do what is called extended family typing, where you look at the uncles, the aunts, the grandparents, but the chances do decrease in finding a donor in them, but it would be, it's not wrong to do that. However, if you don't find a family donor, next slide, please. You look for an unrelated donor search, which I've just spoken about earlier. So in this day and age, with unrelated donor transplantation, we can provide almost equivalent outcomes of about a 90% thalassemia-free survival in these children by doing whether it's a family or unrelated donor. Of course, the supportive care increases if it's an unrelated donor, but it can be done. Now, I wouldn't call this the new kid on the block anymore. This has been there around now for almost a decade, called haploidentical transplantation, which is half-match transplants. So I think Dr. Revati spoke about it, Satish spoke about it, that you know that you get thalassemia if you get one gene from your dad and one gene from your mom. Similarly, HLA also in all of us is half from our mother, half from our father. That's just how it usually is. Very, very rarely you would find an HLA which is not matching with fully or in at least half with one of the parents, but most of the time it will. So your parents will definitely be a half match for you. There are chances your sibling also may be a half match. So if they are half a match and not a full match, still with that half matched also, you can provide thalassemia-free survival of 75%. This is our own data which we analyzed. So today, if there is no family donor, you look for unrelated donor. If there is no unrelated donor, you definitely can provide thalassemia-free disease cure by doing a half-match transplant as well. Now, preparing the soil, like I said, conditioning. You give chemotherapy. Again, lots of advances in the chemotherapy drugs which are used. Busulfan was the drug which was used earlier. It is still available. It is cost-effective, but it has a lot of toxicity in terms of hepatotoxicity, causing primary gonadal failure, causing infertility. But triosulfan is an advance in that category, which is expensive, but it has much better outcomes in terms of maybe preserving fertility, in terms of having less toxicity to the liver. at least the children who've received triosulfan, we can see that they are getting their periods and pubertal changes normally without hormonal supplements. So that's a good advance. And because of drugs like triosulfan, that's where we are saying that even with older age children, you can still provide good outcomes. So you give this high dose chemotherapy, you remove the bad stem cells from the stem cell niche or from the bone marrow, and it also helps the patient to be prepared so that they accept the new stem cells. So the most commonly now we're using this combination of 3 drugs called triosulfan, fludarabine, and thiotepa. And you can see in this where the outcomes and the survival has been much better as compared to the older regimen, which has busulfan. Next slide, please. So the stem cell source can be of 3 types. Next slide, please. So one is bone marrow, peripheral blood, and cord blood. So bone marrow is where you harvest the stem cells from the posterior superior iliac spine. So the donor is given complete general anesthesia. They're put in a prone position and you harvest the stem cells and you collect them in a bag as shown here. Next slide, please. Another technique is peripheral blood stem cells, where you give the donor 4 days of injection granulocyte colony stimulating factor. So what this GCSF does is it will mobilize your stem cells from within the marrow into the blood, and then you collect the stem cells just like you do a blood donation. So here there is no anesthesia, there is no OT, there is no procedure that is involved of like the bone marrow harvest. And cord blood, of course, is when the newborn baby is being born, you collect the cord blood stem cells. Next slide, please. So what kind of stem cell source you use will depend a lot on the condition, on the patient, on the donor, etc. And then once you give them conditioning, you've prepared them, you give them the stem cells like a blood transfusion. Next slide, please. And now comes the most difficult part, which is supportive care. So it takes at least about 2 weeks for these stem cells to settle within your body. So they are completely neutropenic. They don't have the immunity to fight infections. They need blood products at this time. They will require antibiotics, antifungal agents. They may require ICU support as well. Not everyone, but some of them do. And we need to provide this sort of service in something called HEPA filtered rooms, which are basically rooms which have a positive pressure inside so that nothing from outside is entering the room, and you're decreasing risk of infections, especially with spores and fungus. And the previous picture showed our BMT unit, which is an 8-bedded unit. And you need to provide adequate nutrition as well. And you need to give them medicines, immunosuppressive therapy, so that they can accept the new stem cells. Next slide, please. There is definitely a risk of infections, especially when it comes to our country. A point here to make is that the infections don't generally come from outside. These are infections which come mainly from within our own body. So the normal bacteria which we all have within our gut is what translocates into the blood and causes infections when your WBC is low, which is what is the requirement for that supportive care in those 2 weeks. And there is definitely a lot of multi-drug resistant bacterial infections. There's a risk of fungal infections. So we need to watch and monitor and give them appropriate medicines. Next slide, please. So the next step is you continue them on immunosuppression. You give them certain medicines so that they don't get graft versus host disease. So when the new cells are settled in their body, the child's body will say, these are not my cells, I'm going to fight with them. They'll recognize those as non-self. And that's where you get graft versus host disease. So if it's a fully matched sibling, the chance of graft versus host disease is very minimal. However, if it's an unrelated transplant, there is a higher risk of graft versus host disease. Therefore, they need more medicines to control that. Follow-up care is extremely important. Like we said, they need to be on immunosuppressive therapy so that they accept the new graft for at least about a year, which means they are at risk of getting infections till they are on these medicines. So they need to be careful. Initially, we tell them to stay around the hospital close by, but after that, when they go back to their villages or whichever city, town, that's where shared care comes in. And that's where the role of all the pediatricians comes in, because shared care is extremely important. When they, if they go back, suppose to Coimbatore, and they get a fever, they get vomiting, it may be because of anything. And that's why we liaise a lot with the pediatricians who are their primary pediatricians, so that we can provide adequate care. The ferritin, which was very high in their body earlier prior to transplantation, also needs to be decreased after transplantation. This we preferably start this about a year or so after transplantation by doing phlebotomy. They need to be vaccinated again, and so that they, against all the preventable diseases as per the IAP schedule. Next slide, please. So the important thing is we need to counsel patients early. Transplantation can be done for everyone today. Money is definitely an issue, but now with, especially in Tamil Nadu with the CM scheme and with several other NGOs, public-private partnerships, we should not make money a hindrance and somehow find a way out of that. And every child can have a donor, whether it's a matched family or unrelated or a half matched. And blood group difference does not make a difference, does not matter. Carriers, even if the donor is a carrier, does not matter as far as donating stem cells is concerned. What the child will become is a carrier, but they'll be at least out of the thalassemia major situation where they require blood transfusions. And definitely long-term monitoring for late side effects is important. So I won't touch on this, but gene therapy is something that everyone wants to know about. It's happening the world over. There is research going on, but it's not yet very effective in thalassemia. In gene therapy, you take the patient's own stem cells, you modify it in a lab such that you replace the bad gene with a normal gene, and which then produces normal hemoglobin and red blood cells. And you, just like similarly to the steps that I told about transplant, you give it, infuse that back to the patient. But it's not yet available in India, maybe in the future, but yeah, transplant is certainly available and that can be provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramya. You have comprehensively put it into the audience who will have a good idea about the curative aspect of the management, whichever child and their parents will dream of. Of course, made to reality in our place by none other than Dr. Revati. Dr. Ramya, you are already a full-fledged hemato-oncologist and bone marrow transplantist. No wonder, as is the guru, so is the shishya, if you permit me to say so. It is a pleasant thing both for the teacher and the taught. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You're very kind.
There is one question to be answered in the chat box. Would you like to take it, ma'am?
Sure.
It's about antenatal diagnosis. Is there any fetal marker by an antenatal ultrasound? This is asked by Jalil.
We can't really do non-invasive monitoring at the moment or testing for thalassemia. So as we said, that even patients with thalassemia major, fetal hemoglobin, make sure that they are looking completely normal. So all of the clinical manifestations are going to come only after the baby is 3 to 4 months old. So on ultrasound, we will see nothing. So this is the whole problem with thalassemia. Mother looks completely normal. Antenatal screening, baby looks completely normal. And then 3rd, 4th month after the baby is born, that's when the whole thing reveals itself. So the only thing that would give us a clue is a mild anemia in the mother. We have to be proactive. Test that whether she's a thalassemia carrier. If she alone is a carrier, not a problem. But if a partner is also a carrier, then the baby stands a 25% chance of having thalassemia major. And if the poorest of the poor, we have to be more aggressive with prevention, because these are the people that can't afford to have a baby who needs lifelong blood transfusion and chelation.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir, you have to unmute, sir. Jared, sir.
This is for ma'am. Nice presentation, and we enjoyed all your talk.
Thank you. Thanks.
Madam, you mentioned about the PGD, madam. This is is this available in our center in our state before choosing for
so
an
there
embryo?
is a group in Ahmedabad that have just started doing PGD. Its success rate is not so high because we have to give medications to the mother to make 8 to 10 eggs instead of 1 egg and the ovum stimulation drugs. Then they have to retrieve the ovum, then take sperms from the dad, create 8 to 10 embryos in the lab. Once the embryo is in the 4-cell stage, out of the 4 cells, they have to take out 1 cell, analyze which fetus is negative for thalassemia and HLA match for the affected baby, and take that embryo and implant it into the mother. So the chance of finding a thalassemia negative baby with HLA match with every cycle is only about 20%. And the procedure cost at the moment is 8 to 10 lakhs. So you will spend 8 to 10 lakhs and there's only 20% chance that you will be able to retrieve an ovum, an embryo that is compatible with carrying on the pregnancy. And also 2 or 3 of our patients, after the good embryo is implanted, they couldn't continue pregnancy and there was early abortion as well. So although it is good technology, the success rate is only in the range of 20 to 25%, and the older the mother, the lesser the chance.
So for the one you have presented, the second sibling with the normal variant, madam, how you did the counseling or how you did the testing for the second sibling? Those were already affected the previous one.
So the first baby has thalassemia major. So when they come to say that the mother is now pregnant, we will do the gene testing for the family. The mother will have 1 abnormal gene, father will have 1 abnormal gene, the baby will have both the abnormal genes. So we have a first step. It will take us 2 weeks to identify what is the affected genes in this family. Second step, we will do the prenatal testing. When the mother is about 11 to 13 weeks pregnant, we will send them for chorion-villus sampling, because from chorion-villus sampling, we have very little fetal tissue. We can't be looking at 400 different genes of thalassemia. So we'll only look in this particular index family, which are the genes affected. Then only those 2 genes we will check whether baby has or not. If baby has both the affected genes, then baby is also affected. We will recommend termination. 1 gene is 1 affected gene baby has means it's a carrier, that is no problem. Neither of the affected genes are there in the baby, then it's a normal baby. So only those who agree to termination of pregnancy, we will do fetal testing. If they say my religion will not allow me to terminate pregnancy, then there's no point in going ahead and poking the baby.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, ma'am.
Shall we do the quiz, Fauzia?
Good afternoon, madam. I am Dr. Ramesh Babu,
yes.
HOD Pediatrics, Dharmaburi Medical College, madam. Just yes. One query to you, madam. Revati Raj, madam.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Madam, we are having hemoglobinopathy daycare center in our institution.
Yes.
We are having around 105 thalassemia patients registered in our institution. The age group from 10 months to 35 years.
Correct.
About 50 to 60 persons will be in the age group of more than 15 years, madam. 15 to 30 years. Is it possible to do cardiac MRI for them under CMCHIS in our institution, madam?
Yeah, so cardiac MRI is feasible, and in fact, we had a very good program running with Keelpok Medical College. We will book an appointment and send them, and they were actually giving us results the same evening. But because of this COVID situation, we've not been able to do any imaging because everyone's worried when they go for imaging, they're going to contract COVID. So last 1 year, we have not done any cardiac MRI at all, but it is there in the CM scheme. We can access HLA typing, we can do through CM scheme, we can do cardiac MRI through CM scheme. It is all possible.
Okay, madam.
And
Then
adult thalassemia, they need a lot more care. They are not like the children. As their age advances, the number of complications we see, especially in the first 10 years, they've not had optimal care. Then the 10 to 15-year-olds will be one particular type of challenge, 15 to 20. And above 20, you will see a lot of bone disease, back pain, leg pain, mobility issues, hypersplenism. So just treating these 105 patients itself will be full-time job.
thank you, madam. Once the COVID wave subsides,
Sure.
I will coordinate with your PRO, Mr. Rajkumar,
Yes.
and I will try to do the needful for those patients, madam.
Yes.
Thank you very much, madam. Thank you.
Dr. Booma, you want to say anything?
Madam?
Dr. Booma is there, so I asked if he wants to say anything.
Unmute, ma'am.
Yeah.
Unmute, ma'am, please.
Booma, you have to unmute.
Unmute.
After the quiz, let the program go on, madam. We'll go on with the quiz and afterwards we'll.
Okay.
Sorry, I joined late because of a
No,
meeting.
it's good, good.
Madam, one more question to Ms. Revati, madam. Regarding the imaging, madam, before going for an MRI, where instead of screening every organ, is it the PET scan will help you, madam?
No, because we are looking here only at how much tissue iron is there. And MRI picks up iron because of the magnetic background. It picks up iron better. PET is good if we are looking at fast growing tissues. So like in cancer or tuberculosis, where glucose uptake is good. So here MRI is better than PET.
Thank you, madam.
Hello? Hello?
We'll go ahead with the quiz, sir.
Yes, sir. I first want to thank all the speakers of today's program. And I also like to say Happy Mother's Day to all the present and future mothers, today being a Mother's Day. So I will invite our doctor to conduct the programs.
Now we'll have the quiz by Dr. Rumesh Chandan.
Ramesh Chandra.
How are we going to do this, Fauzia? You'll be entering the results, whoever is doing, in the chat box so that we can give the best prize.
Yes, they can either answer or put it in the chat box.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am, and Coimbatore IAP for this opportunity. So we had an interesting and informative session on thalassemia by ma'am and team. So I hope with this short quiz session, I'll be able to give you a better understanding of hemoglobin electrophoresis. So going to the quiz number 1. A 24-year-old pregnant female who has come for booking, and this is her CBC report.
I'm not able to see the chat box, so you have to look at it, Ramesh, to see if someone's answered or not.
Yes, ma'am. So no one has answered, so I'll, yeah, correct, ma'am. They have answered correct. It's a carrier. So if you look at the CBC report, the machine actually tells us that the hemoglobin is 11.9, MCV is low at 60, and if you look at the RBC count, it is high at around 6.14 millions. So applying the Menser's index, which is MCV by RBC count, and if the ratio is less than 13, it is thalassemia trait, and if it is more than 13, it's iron deficiency anemia. So from this CBC, what you're seeing is the ratio is around 9, which is less than 13. So this pregnant mom, she is a thalassemia carrier. It's very important to note this because the thal carrier state is not a disease, and the family has to be counseled and educated regarding the genetic nature of the disease and the prenatal diagnosis. Because if, as ma'am said, if the husband is a thal carrier, then the chance of the child having thalassemia major is 25%, and not having thalassemia major is again 25%. So we need to do this prenatal diagnosis so that we can all prevent the new thalassemia major births. So we all have this responsibility to work together to prevent the new birth of thalassemia major children. Coming to the second quiz, this is a 9-year-old child with a hemoglobin of 9 and who has been on iron replacement for nearly a year. This is the hemoglobin electrophoresis of the child. Yeah, we have got answers right, ma'am. So again, if you look at this hemoglobin electrophoresis, the HbA2 is elevated. The normal is 3.5. Now the value here is 5.3. So what you need to know is this is a TAL carrier hemoglobin electrophoresis. The important thing is a hemoglobin of 9 is acceptable in thalassemia minor. And if you keep on going iron replacement for a long time, this is not going to build up the hemoglobin level of these people, because it's a genetic condition, and this low hemoglobin is not going to make them weak. We have some living examples like Rafael Nadal, who is a thalassemia carrier and still he is a Wimbledon champion. So this hemoglobin of 9 is acceptable for these children. Quiz number 3. A child from Ooty with jaundice and with the following hemoglobin electrophoresis report. Correct. So people answered correct one. So this is the electrophoresis report showing elevated HbS percentage around 84%. So if you have any child who is having jaundice with gallstones or anemia, aches and pains, and coming from a high risk area, so we have to suspect a sickle cell. And this electrophoresis, if it is showing a HbS percentage of more than 50, it is diagnosis of sickle cell anemia. And if it is less than 50%, it is sickle cell trait. Again, here it is very important to have a prenatal diagnosis so that sickle cell, a new burst of sickle cell anemia can be prevented. Quiz number 4. 5-year-old child with long-standing anemia with obvious hemolytic phases, but no history of transfusion so far, and has on examination has a firm 4 cm spleen. So looking at the child's CBC and electrophoresis report, child has anemia with low MCV, and the electrophoresis shows 100% HbF. And this is a mother's hemoglobin electrophoresis, which shows elevated HbF, but the A2 fraction is normal, and MCV is low in the CBC. And this is the father's reports. The father has MCV of 68 and HbF of 8 with normal HbA2. Now we had an answer, ma'am. So when the hemoglobin F percentage is elevated, there are 3 differential diagnoses. In a child, if HbF is elevated, it can be thalassemia major, or hereditary persistence of fetal hemoglobin, or delta beta thalassemia. So in this scenario, if you look at the reports, the child's HbF is 100%, but if it's going to be beta thalassemia major, the parents' HbA2 should be elevated more than 3.5 and HbF should be normal. But in this case, it is not so. The hemoglobin F is elevated and A2 is normal. So it is not beta thalassemia major. So what if it is hereditary persistence of fetal hemoglobin? In hereditary persistence of fetal hemoglobin, a child will have elevated HbF fraction beyond 6 months, but the parents' electrophoresis report will be normal. So here again, because they have an abnormally elevated HbF, it is not hereditary persistence of fetal hemoglobin. The third differential, delta beta thalassemia. Here, when the delta and beta chains are getting deleted and the parents are both carrier status for this, the child will have elevated HbF fraction and the parents will have elevated HbA2. Sorry, the parents will have elevated HbF and normal HbA2. So this child has delta beta thalassemia and the parents are carriers for this delta beta thalassemia. Quiz number 5. A 9-year-old child from Assam, Northeast India, with anemia and anemia and splenomegaly with no history of any transfusion so far. And this is the hemoglobin electrophoresis report. So we have got an answer. Yeah. Actually, if you look at this hemoglobin electrophoresis report, the A2 fraction is elevated at around 23%, and there is elevated HbF also. So this is an E beta thal because both HbA2 and HbE will fall in the same retention time. But depending on the value of the retention, like we can differentiate between three entities. If the retention time is the value is around 0 to 10%, it is HbA2. If it is between 11 and 20, it is hemoglobin LePor. And if it is more than 20%, it is hemoglobin E. So looking at this value of 23%, we know it is E, and there is fetal hemoglobin, so it is E beta thal. If it is more than 50% HB, it is homozygous hemoglobin E. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have the scores, but I do not have the name of the winner. The winner's name is Galaxy S8. I don't know who the person is.
Galaxy Wind. Galaxy Wind.
Galaxy S8. That person has answered 4 out of 5 questions correctly. And Dr. Bala Subramania, he answered 2 out of 5.
Congrats to him.
Says Dr. Nandakumar. Is that our Nandakumar or is that a different Nandakumar?
It's the same Nandakumar, ma'am.
Oh, hi, Nandakumar. How are you?
I'm fine, ma'am. I'm fine, ma'am. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we have. Yes. Congratulations, Nandakumar. Congratulations.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
I think the whole point is to go spread the message for PAL prevention, and whatever we do today, and if we can prevent even a single birth in our life and prevent all the suffering and misery they go through, that is good.
Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Now I
Thank you.
request Dr. Bhuma, President IAP Coimbatore, to say a few words.
Thank you, Fauzia. Good afternoon, one and all. And sorry, I was not able to meet in the beginning of the session because, you know, this COVID surge, we have to have an urgent meeting at the collectorate for some oxygen issues. So, and I didn't want to miss even a single session, as I can really vouch that Revati Raj RR and one more R we can add as RBC to as a degree, or it's like inborn into madam. And everything through IAP, as personally as head of the department, even when I was an assistant professor, anybody with that, I'll just call her, and anytime she'll answer all my queries and help lots and lots of patients. I personally thank her for that. Apart from the lecture for today and the beautiful series which we have done today, and it is like a Sunday feast, because it is like aptly taken small portions. It is not overfed. It is correctly, you got all the information very crisply done, and hats off to all the presenters who have done it so well. And Rumesh also did a very good quiz, and starting from how to diagnose, how to treat, and till the latest mode of treatment available. And again, I was very happy to see Tamrabarani. She was my patient in my clinic, and she came about 2 weeks ago, and seeing her tall and going to college, I was really happy to see her. And she came with a brother who was a donor, Pugal, and I was really happy. And that was first time I think Revati madam had helped for the one child from Coimbatore, and with their father Senthil, who had taken so much interest. And in our Coimbatore Medical College, we have started a daycare center for thalassemia, and this year government also has brought these thalassemic children and other hemoglobinopathies and differently abled, and they'll be getting monetary benefit also, so that because money matters, so that they don't go away, they don't go back in the treatment, and of course they continue with the treatment. And we have currently there's a problem of Desi rocks also in our hospital. We're trying to get from other these things is apart from the situation and now. And, like pediatricians are always taking care of children. And when they grow to adults, as our IAP president, incoming Dr. Ramesh, the sitting HOD of Dharmapuri Medical College, have also stated. So we have adult patients who are coming. They don't want to leave the pediatric ward. They say every vayasa korchengala in English, like that they are telling. So we have to look after for the other complications like emotional issues, endocrine issues, what is the life they have to face after marriage. And all these things have been dealt very clearly in this session. And thank you all once again from the bottom of my heart for such nice, informative lecture. Thank you all. Yes, Fauzia.
Thank you, ma'am. On behalf of IAP Coimbatore, I would like to thank all the speakers for giving a detailed but interesting but small to cover all the aspects of thalassemia, and a special thanks to Desikalu sir for chairing the session and making my work easier. And thanks to Revati ma'am for accepting the invitation, and without whom the CME would not be possible at all. Thank you, ma'am. And once again, I would like to thank everyone, each and everyone who took part in this CME. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to also end by thanking my team, and anything to do with thalassemia and raising awareness. They are very keen at this age, and I hope they are there in the future to see that we have a thalassemia-free India at some point. So good luck to all of us here. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we conclude the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all.